The way that I look at it, there are two ways that you can approach your landscape photography. The first is to visit a new location every time, looking for new compositions. The second is to limit yourself to just a few locations and visit them over and over and over again. And in this video, I'm going to be making a case for the latter. Today I'm up in the Harper Hills above the Swindale Valley, and this is my third visit to this very spot. You see, my approach to photography is to find a location that I think has potential, to find a composition that I think works, and then to return to that time and time again so that I can photograph the scene under various different conditions. And I think that if you look at my portfolio, about 80% of the shots in that have come from this approach. So as I explained, part of the reason for doing this is so that I can photograph scenes under different conditions. And this is the photograph that I took on my very first visit here. It was taken well after sunrise, and so I decided to blow out the sky. So I've got no detail in the sky, but I really like the composition. And this helped me to make the decision that this location and this composition, it had potential. So I made a plan to return when the sun would be rising to the right-hand side of the rock. And this is the shot that I got on that second visit. There's a lot more interest in the shot. There's a lot more detail in the sky, so I think the shot's a little bit more balanced. And now I've come back, and as you can see today, conditions are rather grey and they're rather overcast. And so I'm going to have a go at taking this shot and creating a much more moody, more sort of dramatic feeling photo. The light is pretty flat this morning. It's very, very overcast. We've got absolutely no shadow at all, and you really do need shadow to create texture and exaggerate shape and form and that sort of thing. But if you saw my last video, you will know how I like to use contrast that naturally occurs in the landscape and then to exaggerate that using computer software like Adobe Lightroom. And so I'm actually feeling quite confident that I can not only create something that's very different to the previous images that I've taken here, but something that's actually quite good in its own right. The second reason why I favour this approach, and probably my main reason for doing it, is it gives me the opportunity to correct mistakes that I've made with composition. I spend an awful lot of time sat in front of my computer, self-critiquing my work, making notes about how I could improve my compositions. So if you consider the first time I was here, I was actually fairly happy with that composition, but on my second visit I made the mistake of forgetting to bring a copy of that first photo with me on my phone for me to refer to, and as a result I think I ended up shooting a little bit too tight. I used too long a focal length, and that meant that that rock is just a little bit too big in the frame. It's a little bit too dominant. So coming back again today has given me the opportunity to correct that, to try a slightly shorter focal length and see if I can produce a slightly better composition. Now I haven't made that mistake again. I've got my phone with me, and on here are those first two photographs that I took on my first two visits. And if I refer to them, I know that I need to get the left-hand side of my frame as far over to the left-hand side as I possibly can without cutting into those rocks on the left-hand side, and that I need to get the right-hand side of my frame as far over as I possibly can to leave a good space between the edge of the frame and that rock on the right-hand side. And in order to do that, I need to be shooting at about 20mm, which is the same focal length as I used when I took the first image. I should point out at this stage that once an image gets selected to go into my portfolio, then that location is retired, and that allows me to focus on new locations and finding new compositions. And that's really because I feel that if I've got an image that's good enough to go into my portfolio, then I've done that location justice and it's time to move on. Now this approach isn't without its problems. The first of those is that you do run the risk that your photography can get a little bit formulaic. You end up producing the same looking photograph over and over and over again. The second one is you can become a little bit too single-minded, and I've been very guilty of this in the past, where I come out with a specific shot in mind, something else happens, and I ignore it because I'm trying to concentrate on what I actually came to get. And that does mean that I have in the past missed shots that I really should have got. Now, if you take the other approach where you're going to a new location every time and you're trying to find a composition, when you get there, there's always an element of luck involved if you get a really good shot. The great advantage of this approach is that you can plan to return at a specific time, so you can get the sun in a specific location. So if you look at this second shot that I got, I planned to be there when the sun was rising in that location. So I eliminated luck completely. That allowed me to take a lot more control. And at the end of the year, when I sit down and I pick the images that are going to go into my portfolio or the images that are going to go into that year's zine, I think that the vast majority of images that I choose are captured in this way. There are still a few that I get when I'm out visiting locations or exploring locations for the first time, but with those, there's always that element of luck. I think that's enough chopsing. It's time for me to put my money where my mouth is and see if I take a shot now whether I can produce something that's worth sharing. So that's an insight into how I approach my photography. But what about you? Do you like to visit a new location every time you go out with a camera? Or do you like to go to a location over and over and over again? Or is it a combination of the two? Let me know which one you prefer, and more importantly, why, by dropping a comment below.